Hello everyone, welcome all to today's session. We might make a start so that we can keep on time today. It's great to have you joining us for today's webinar. I'm Rita Yates, for those that don't know me. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Insurtech Australia, where we've had the mission of building a world-leading insurtech ecosystem since 2017. So our session today is covering the theme of scaling insurtech into the US, and it's part of our scaling series, which is supported by Austrade. Our previous session was focused on the New Zealand market, and we have another session in November focusing on the UK market, and then that will be followed by the Singapore market. Now, those four regions have been chosen based on input and feedback from our Australian insurtech members, as well as where we see the most opportunity currently sitting for Australian companies to scale into globally. These regions also align with Austrade, and we'd like to take this opportunity to thank them for their ongoing support for our organisation and for this series as well. So today we'll be hearing from Elise Webb, Austrade's Investment Director in New York, and that will be followed by a panel conversation where we'll be joined by David Gritz from Insurtech New York, as well as Stacey Brown from Insurtech Hartford. And we're also really pleased to have an additional panelist in the discussion, Megan Branch from the Global Insurtech Accelerator, bringing perspectives from Iowa, which is another important region in the US from an insurance perspective, as we know. Following that discussion, we're going to hear from Justin Turner, the VP of Strategic Partnerships from CoverGenius, as a case study of an Australian insurtech that has scaled into the US successfully. And as of yesterday, some big news, they've just closed their Series C funding round of $100 million, which is super exciting. So why is the US so important, or why do we see it as so important from an insurtech perspective? Well, we probably know that really that is where insurtech was born, and still today represents the most amount of insurtech activity as well as funding activity, with more than 50% of global funding still coming from that region. It's probably the most important region globally still, and perhaps represents the most amount of opportunity for insurtechs from other regions to scale into. So today we're aiming to cover some detail around the current landscape in the US, some of the resources available, and some of the opportunities and hurdles that may exist for Australian insurtechs looking at that space. We have enabled our Q&A function on the webinar today, so please do pop your questions in as we're going through the webinar. I may answer them as we're going along if we're relevant to the discussion that we're having at the time. Otherwise, we have about 10 minutes left at the end for Q&A, and we will look at those questions at the time. So I'd now like to hand over to Elise Webb from Austrade to kick off. Thanks, Elise.
Good morning all, and thank you, Rita, for that introduction. As Rita said, my name is Elise Webb and I'm an investment director with the Australian Trade and Investment Commission, or Austrade, supporting companies as part of the fintech and financial services sector team here in the Americas. The team is led by Steve Rank, the Trade and Investment Commissioner in New York, who's also on today's session. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Austrade, we're the federal government's trade promotion and investment attraction agency. We have a strong presence in the US market with posts in San Francisco, Houston, Chicago, Washington, DC, and New York. We cover multiple industry sectors ranging from agribusiness and defense to health, resources and energy, and obviously fintech and insurtech. It probably goes without saying, but the US is an extremely important market for Australia. It's a global source of capital, it's Australia's largest source of foreign direct investment, and it's a key growth market for Australian companies seeking to expand internationally. Australia and the US have a deep trading history, with the establishment of the Free Trade Agreement more than 15 years ago to facilitate increased trade and investment between the countries. This relationship recently deepened with the announcement of AUKUS last week and the renewed focus on technology collaboration in areas such as AI and quantum. Whilst these announcements were focused on defence and not directly relevant to the broader technology market yet, it is a positive demonstration of the close relationship between Australia and the US and the future opportunities to come. So you're thinking about the US or you're ready to jump. How can Austrade help? This really depends on what stage of your US expansion or exploration that you're in. The Austrade team in Australia is partnering with Insurtech Australia and committed to supporting industry expansion through our global network of offices and specifically the US. Formally, we offer a number of programs to help Australian companies prepare for the US market. These include our landing pad program based in San Francisco, an intensive 90-day program focused on supporting Australian scale-ups, and also our FinTech activation program here in New York, which launched earlier this year as part of the Australian government's $9.6 million commitment to supporting FinTech, including Insurtech, announced in the 2020 federal budget. We also offer a suite of tailored services to companies, including introductions to contacts and service providers in market, market information and data preparation, invitation to participate or present at relevant industry events and roundtables, etc. Really, the best way to understand how we might be able to support your US expansion is to have a conversation. So I invite you all to please not hesitate and reach out to either Steve or myself after today, and we'd be more than happy to discuss. A great example of an Australian insurtech that Austrade has supported in entering the US market is Melbourne-based Handy. Handy is an online platform that connects insurance claimants to qualified repairers and their insurers in a unique and improved way on traditional methods. The company participated in the Hartford Accelerator program in 2019 and recognized an opportunity for their offering in the US market, beginning their expansion here from there. In 2020, Handy participated in our landing pad program in San Francisco, which is led by Dave Brown, and also received one-to-one tailored services from our West Coast team, with a keen focus on pitching to a US audience and also VC engagement support. In June of this year, Handy raised $3 million from US investors, their first institutional round, to further support this expansion, making it a great Australian success story with much more to come. Before handing back, I just want to sort of leave with some final words of advice regarding the US market. Firstly, you need to have a product or offering ready to go, preferably with use cases. You need to be committed, resourced with both human and financial capital, and patient in building your success. Thank you.
Thanks, Elise. Thanks very much for that and for Austrade's support. We will now move into the panel discussion session for today. So I have on the line Megan, David and Stacey, and I'll ask you to pop your cameras on now. And first and foremost, welcome. Each of you are based in the US, so it's a different time zone to what we are here in Australia. So really appreciate your time in joining us today. So to begin, I'm actually going to just ask you to, if you could please introduce your organization, and perhaps just a little bit about what you do would be helpful. And I might just kick off with Stacey, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stacey Brown, and I'm with the organization Insurtech Hartford. We're based in Hartford, Connecticut, which is up in the upper northeast section of the country. We're about halfway between New York City and Boston. So our organization, we're probably one of the older ones when it comes to Insurtech now. We launched in about 5 years ago when the trend in Insurtech and insurance innovation started to become a thing. And we saw that investment was starting to go into early stage companies, and we thought, hey, you know, in Hartford, we have a lot of insurance. Why don't we do something here? And in Hartford actually is a pretty big hub for insurance. A lot of large companies in health, in life, and P&C are located in Hartford. They don't just have offices, but they have corporate headquarters. So as Insurtech Hartford, a big part of what we do is kind of works in two directions. Number one is helping companies get familiar with and make connections in Hartford and the region. And then the other thing is we help the local companies to find new technologies and stuff from the globe.
Perfect. Thanks, Stacey. Megan?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Megan Brandt, and I am the program manager at the Global Insurance Accelerator, or the GIA. We were founded in 2014 in Des Moines, Iowa, which is smack dab right in the middle of the country, in the middle of the green farmland. After watching other industries tap into early stage startups to help innovate their industry, that's what caused some industry leaders in Iowa decide to create this accelerator. So we decided to focus purely on the insurance ecosystem. and 7 Iowa insurance companies came together to fund an annual accelerator program to help foster innovation in the entire insurance industry. So we've now run 7 annual equity-based accelerator programs, which have featured 50 early stage insurtech companies now since our first program in 2015. And totals, we've made initial investments of over $2.3 million. And we have a current board of directors of 11 insurance companies and a mentor pool of over 100 insurance professionals from over 35 other carriers. And outside of the main accelerator program, we do run a 1-week program each year for a focus on growth stage insurtech companies who are here for business development and who are looking to expand their presence in the US. So happy to be here.
Thanks, Megan and David.
Hi, everyone. I'm David Gritz, the co-founder of InsurtechNY, and glad to be joined by Stacey and Megan, because really they set the foreground. We came much later than them, and we formed in 2019 and really had the opportunity to see what they've been doing in their communities. So we're based in New York City, and there's 2 sides of our business. So one is an events organization. So we run 8 to 10 events a year, anything from full day conferences to evening mixers. And then the other side of our business is our corporate membership program, which is where we run programs for insurance carriers and brokers to connect them to the right startups. So that includes a global competition, which we've had many Australian insurtechs participate in, executive briefings for our insurance carriers and brokers. And then we pick up where GIA leaves off, and a lot of the companies from their early stage program have joined our growth stage accelerator. And I'm really proud that we just kind of gone through our selection day for our second cohort. So we'll be announcing that next week. And our first cohort is doing really well. Already, we've had over 210 million of follow-on funding from our first cohort. So that's a little summary of us.
Awesome. Thank you all. And so I might now move to, again, from each of you, just a little bit of insight around perhaps the landscape, the insurtech landscape in your region and beyond around the US, and perhaps some of the observations that you've made in particular during this year. And if you have some sort of crystal ball for the rest of the year and perhaps beyond, how you see that insurtech landscape sort of developing. So any observations from your end would be really helpful for us here in Australia. And we'll just go around the grounds again.
So I can start if that's all right. So insurtech, the way I see it, kind of there's 2 sides to it. Excuse me, bad timing. Sorry about that. So 2 sides to insurtech. One being those that are helping or who are selling insurance, creating product and selling insurance. The other side are the people trying to make insurance more efficient, right? So those that are trying to sell insurance, those are your Lemonades of the world as we think of them here in the U.S. The future is very bright. There are changes to what's been happening due to things like COVID and people becoming more used to digital remote ways of working. That's leading to new market opportunities, and so insurers are keeping an eye on that, and they're looking for opportunities to capitalize. And so startups are coming in and trying to help create those opportunities. The other side of the fence is those startups that are trying to help insurers improve, like by reducing costs, be more efficient, and I guess these things have always been there. And it's nothing new, but nowadays, there's been so much noise about the disruption, the digital disruption of the insurance industry, that insurers are really paying attention. We've seen the Moody's agency, who does a lot of ratings for capital markets. They've started to put innovation as a part of the scale there. And so it's becoming more and more important for insurers to make sure that they're considering innovation and finding new ways to be innovative. So if you're an insurtech that wants to sell product and help distribute product, there's upside for that. And if you're an insurtech who has a technology that you're looking to distribute, there's upside for that.
A great answer, Stacey. And I think if I could just tack on, it's probably a really similar theme, is that there's a lot of opportunity. The landscape is just getting bigger, it seems like. We really see the opportunity that exists for insurtech companies who are solving real customer problems. They're in great position to partner with and help incumbent insurers. It's like no longer necessarily a threat to incumbents, but rather they seem to be more open to partner. When I first started at the GIA back in 2016, I managed the mentor program. And I remember it was like a little bit like pulling teeth to get people to raise their hand from insurance companies to come teach startup founders. And just, I don't know, there's not so much of an understanding on how the pace went or what they're actually trying to solve or how technology can do that. But it just seems like we're seeing a big shift in companies taking on more risk, adding more budget, focusing on innovation and corporate strategy. It just seems like a really exciting time, no matter where the company is coming from around the world. So that's just my first insight.
Yeah, so to build on what Stacey and Megan said, I think a lot of what they focus on are some of the kind of areas of breakouts. And I think how I would look at it is from the value chain perspective. So underwriting and distribution, policy admin, and claims. So from an underwriting and distribution side of things, the carriers in the US, this is the hottest area for them. It's actually in our newsletter, we talked about how in early 2015, those were some of the early areas of companies that got traction. And that's one of those themes that's continued through to today. So looking for alternative data sources, especially some states in the US are essentially banning the use of credit scores for underwriting. So if you can provide alternative data sources, if you have a way to provide new distribution, whether it's embedded or you have a better mousetrap to lower the cost of acquisition. Cost of acquisition for new customers in the US is extremely high. So those are areas that are in the highest demand. In terms of policy administration, that's where the most mature insurtechs exist. These were the ones that formed in early 2000s companies like Duck Creek and Guidewire. I would say that that's a pretty mature market. There are a number of startups that have continued to advance, whether it's like Surify or Socotra or ProtoSure, but that's going to be really tough to compete. So if you're a policy admin system, I would say unless you have a very specific vertical, it's going to be tough to come to the US market. And then last, in terms of claims, it's something that I would say insurers have ignored for a long time. There's some that are starting to take interest in it, but it's still not top of mind. Like when we talk to insurers, they give us a list of 5 things. It's probably like number 6, their afterthought. But I think it's still becoming relevant in this area, which is there's a lot of catastrophes that have been happening in the US, whether it's wildfires, hurricanes, or as Megan is familiar with, derechos. Being able to help insurers to scale up to handle catastrophes, to handle subrogation and some of the more specialized areas in claims, not just digitizing it, I think is going to be an area where you could excel in claims.
Great, excellent insights there. Thank you so much. And that was sort of really specific around some of the particular areas that insurers in the US are currently, putting more focus and energy into. My next question was sort of more around the opportunities, and I think each of you have kind of covered that. Some of those opportunity areas. Certainly, if there's anything else you want to add into that space, please do so. But I was going to just dig a little deeper as well into perhaps what change you've seen on the partnership front, and that would be around firstly the willingness of insurers to explore partnerships. How willing are they to use insurtechs to solve some of their problems, perhaps as opposed to a couple of years ago? How quickly are they entering those partnerships? And this, I guess, a little bit about maybe the success rate, just broadly speaking, of those partnerships. And how much increase in investment are you seeing that insurers are putting into this space and really sort of trying to make it more successful? Here in Australia, we probably still do have a lack of speed when it comes to partnerships between insurtechs and incumbents. So I'm just interested to know a little bit more about that particular space and how you see it has progressed in the US over the last sort of couple of years.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is I can't wait to see David's study on the subject. But I'd say prior to COVID, and I'll call that the early wave of insurtech, a lot of insurers, and there was a lot of innovation theater, it was labeled, right? A lot of insurers just trying to experiment, test and learn, putting their hands into a lot of different things and trying to figure out, what direction to head in. And what I think has happened, COVID came along and it made people step back and say, where are we spending our dollars? Because we don't know where this is going to go. So, so things really pulled back a lot of projects slowed down or stopped. And then, but now we are seeing this rush towards digitalization and digital transformation. But I think the insurers are taking a more balanced approach now, right? So they're not going to go out and explore POCs for the sake of reporting a metric about how many POCs they've done, right? They're back to taking a hard look at economics, what makes sense. I heard it once said, and I repeat this often because I think it sums it up for probably 90% of the carriers out there. And that's, they have the resources to do anything they want. They just don't have the resources to do everything they want. And every insurer is full of people running around like kids in a candy store because they see opportunity all over the place. The thing is, you can't do it all, and trying to find out what is the best thing to focus everybody has limits. Every company has limited resources. What's the best thing to put those limited resources on? And so again, what we're seeing, I think what I've seen over the last few years is this, hey, innovation, let's test and learn, let's explore, let's have lots of activity to hold on, what's going on, and now let's be more measured and calculated and consider the value equation.
I agree with Stacey so much. This testing and learning and playing and trying some new things has been a theme we've seen as well. Where we're it's a little bit harder at the GIA, the accelerator program we run has been primarily focused on super early stage companies who can range from like a concept, like a PowerPoint presentation on how they think they can create a new solution, all the way to companies who are in their MVP stage. But for the capstone of our program is a lot of mentorship, a lot of hands-on with these insurance companies who have volunteers in their organization who are here to teach and to shape and to educate founders on different areas of insurance and what's possible. So I'd say that for us, it's definitely evolved a bit from, all right, we've mentored, we've taught, we're going to step back now and not try a whole lot more. We've given some money. So we've innovated, and it's shifted a bit, I wouldn't say so rapidly, but it shifted a bit because I think they look around at their peers and they see ratings like AM Best. And I'm also excited, David, to see the study. And I hope you talk about it now that we've both mentioned it, but just seeing the pressure from other carriers and just the pressure like from customers for how they'd like their insurance to be. So it's a good shift. It's also still not that quick. I hope that that's still accurate.
Yeah, so I appreciate that setup, both Stacey and Megan. So we announced yesterday the launch of the Insurance Collaboration Index. So we're working with Conning Research and CB Insights. And essentially, the goal of the study is that a lot of startups get support from organizations like ours. They end up raising money from venture capitalists, and then they get stuck in what people call POC hell, where essentially you have a proof of concept, you're working with a carrier, but it either stays as a POC forever, or it's a real struggle to get to commercialization, and that either kills the company or it kills the economics. So the entrepreneurs or the startups are almost doing it basically at a loss. And what we wanted to do is to really say, hey, we want to put data behind that to show what's working, what's not working, what are the best practices, and of course, most importantly, rank the carriers that are doing the best job, those that understand the needs of the startups, that, like Megan talked about, are willing to mentor and work with the founders to get the product where it needs to be so it could be rolled out, and then really support commercialization and allow those companies to be profitable so they can continue to grow and support the industry. So the study is out now. You can actually go on our website and take a look. It's InsurtechNY, and then if you click on index, you can learn more about it and take it. Basically, any insurtech is eligible to take it. We're excluding right now those that sell policies. That'll come later, but we're asking those that sell to insurers because we believe those are the tightest type of relationships. So we ask everyone to take that. It's going to help the industry to have this ranking. And the rule is, I think, if we have at least 3 or 5 carriers that have been reviewed, then they're eligible to be ranked. So you can rank as many carriers as you feel comfortable doing, and don't just put in the good ones. We're going to keep each of the companies anonymous. So if you have something negative to say, please do so, because it's going to help everyone else, and even to give the feedback back to the industry of what things are the most important. So that's our index. I think to answer Rita's question directly, I think there's really 3 different buckets of the US market in terms of how collaboration works. There's the large carriers, which I think are the hardest, right? You have to try and find the right division to get into, and you have to start small. And if you can do that, then you have the opportunity to expand. But oftentimes startups end up getting into the wrong division, and it can take a really long time to navigate to the right place. So if I was an Australian insurtech, I would either see if I can find someone that would get me to the right place, or maybe not start with the largest carriers. The second group is the midsize carriers, and I know Megan works with a lot of them in Des Moines, and honestly, they're really great carriers because they're more nimble. You don't have to go through so many decision processes to get an ultimate decision, because at the end of the day, they're not huge organizations, they're mid-size. And those organizations exist everywhere. They exist in Hartford, they exist in New York, they exist on the West Coast in LA. So you need to find those organizations, and those may be a faster entry. And the last thing to look for, which could be really useful, is looking for insurance carriers that also have a venture arm, because those that are willing to make an investment, oftentimes if they'll make an investment in you, then they have a vested interest to make sure you're successful. So you have people on the inside that are now fighting for you to get that pilot done, or to get that right executive in the meeting. So I think that's another area that could be really effective.
Brilliant, thank you. And David, the index sounds like it's going to be a hugely helpful resource for organizations looking at this space. Do you have a approximate launch date for the index itself?
Yeah, so the index is live now. We're going to be doing a lot of data collection at InsurTech Connect, and we'll be collecting roughly through November, and then from there we'll start to do the analysis, and I think early next year we'll have the results to be able to share.
Amazing, amazing. So we might actually provide everybody online with the link to the index as it sits at the moment, and then we'll look forward to seeing all that data after it's captured. So I probably the next question I wanted to ask about is, if you were an Australian insurtech, are there any particular barriers that you see as still existing for them? And I know each of you have mentioned some of the barriers, you know, whether it's POC hell or ending up in the wrong place with a particular carrier, and probably some of those barriers are the same as what exists in Australia. But any sort of particular barriers that you see with an Australian insurtech entering potential or trying to enter the US market?
So if I could Oh, sorry, Stacey. I'm not sure if we're going in an order again. I think you're going to hear this from all of us, but just the regulation landscape that is the US and how every state can be very different, and even the territories around the US. So the NAIC, which I'm not sure if you've all heard of this organization, is it the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, where they created an Insurtech task force. I think it was in 2017 or 19, someone else can correct me, where they actually gather as a task force and try to understand just the new technologies coming out that insurtech companies globally and in the US are trying to do in the US. And you can actually work with this body. You can, the NAIC has conferences, they have a summit. I know that they have commissioners who are on hand ready to chat with you if you're trying to create some sort of new technology to see if it works within each of the states you're looking at. Some states have historically been easier to work with and I'll let David and Stacey talk about their own experiences with that if they wish. I know like Vermont has been friendly, Kentucky has been friendly. I know Iowa has we have a good relationship with them. And so regulation's huge. And I'm sure Stacey and David will talk about that as well. And if not, then I don't need to beat a dead horse, but regulation.
Yeah, so I guess going out of order here, there's definitely some barriers to think about. I think one of the barriers that unfortunately is the case is the US is very US centric. So that means a couple things that may not be obvious. First is we have 3 time zones here, and many people in the US think those are the only 3 time zones that exist. So that means that if you can't accommodate to them, they're not going to go out of their way. We're community organizers and we're happy to help. So if we have to stay up late or wake up early, it's fine with us. But we don't represent the rest of the US. Most of them want to stay in their 3 friendly time zones, which unfortunately is not very friendly for Australians. So that's one thing to keep in mind. And I think Covered Genius, who you'll hear later, they have people in the US, so that makes it a little easier. So that kind of leads to the second barrier is they're going to look to what validation do you have that they are familiar with. So if you have an Australian carrier or a Singapore carrier as a client and they haven't heard of that carrier, it almost counts as if you have no clients. And it's really unfortunate that that's the case. So if you have globally recognized carriers like Stacey is part of AXA XL, and you can have some kind of relationship with them, or you can work with Marsh or Aon or Gallagher. I think those all translate, but you have to be careful that certain logos that are excellent in Australia or excellent in Asia Pacific don't translate to the US. And the last is, I would call it the capital barrier. And it may not be obvious, but a lot of insurance carriers will look at you and say, and they might ask questions that doesn't seem right that they're going to ask, but how much money have you raised? What does your balance sheet look like? Because they want to make sure that you're going to be around, even if you don't become a customer with them. So they're going to look at your financials as almost a condition of working with them. And then I guess to build on what Megan said, some friendly states from a regulatory perspective, if you want to sell insurance. So sadly, us being in New York, we have a really bad reputation, and it is one of the most difficult states, but we're working with New York DFS, and I would say there's very friendly people here that want to do the right thing, and they've created a number of programs to actually help you to meet people in DFS. But honestly, from our perspective, we like New York, but I would say if you want to pick some other states that MGAs or full stack carriers have been really successful in, I would look to Illinois. And if you're looking to do some more experimental things, and I think Megan was talking about Innovation Task Force, so North Dakota is part of the Innovation Task Force. And another state that's very friendly that we work closely with is Pennsylvania. So I think those 3 states are ones to look at that you might not normally think about. And I mean, North Dakota doesn't have a lot of people that you can sell to, but it's a good place to experiment with. Illinois and Pennsylvania are both big states, so they're good places to start.
Thanks, you guys covered a lot. So how can I add to that? When you first asked the question, Rita, I was thinking, well, what is more difficult for an Australian company? And I think pretty much all companies trying to enter the US, regardless where in the world you are, face pretty much the same barriers. One of the big things, though, is at least you speak some form of English, right, as a native language, so you don't have language as a barrier so much. But I'd say one of the other things, and if you're working with large corporates, right? So David already kind of gave a good breakdown of the market in terms of large carriers, mid-sized carriers, and stuff. But if you're trying to work with large corporates, you can expect to have to go through some kind of vetting process that involves, looking at your financial backing and your financial history, as well as security, right? So if you have any kind of technology, like digital technology, there's going to be a pretty strict, you can expect to go through some hoops to prove your security. And so if you haven't really invested in things like pen testing your platform, or getting any kind of certification from your data center, if you're still doing it the old-fashioned way, right? Then you're gonna have at some point in time, you're gonna hit that brick wall when the IT people start asking you a bunch of questions and you don't have the right answers for them. So I'd say that's a big barrier to make sure you're checking the box before you think about it.
Yeah, excellent. So much there, so much ground that you've covered, which is awesome. Yeah, really, just to mention on the difference in time zones, we really appreciate you, or each of you, working outside of your regular time zone. So we feel very privileged to have you here.
Oh, by the way, we have 4 time zones in the US, continental US.
Okay.
Right? But anyway.
But thank you for that. Just before we move on to Cover Genius, I wanted to ask one more question, which was, I know that a number of Australian insurtechs have been involved with each of your organisations in different ways through different programs. So I just thought it might be helpful to mention, I guess, what resources and programs each of your organisations have available for Aussies to get involved in.
David, you want to start once?
Yeah, sure. So I think there's a number of great programs that you can be involved in, and I think it really depends on what stage you're at. So in terms of if you are an early stage company and you're looking for support to really get feedback about your product, I think Megan's program, the GIA, has a really powerful program to get started. There are a few other early stage accelerators that exist in the US. I would say they don't have as big of a presence, but they do accept certain startups. So for example, there's a Generator program, which is based out of Minneapolis, and they take about 5 startups a year, and it's run by 2 life insurance companies. So it's really more of a life insurance focus. There's a group called Brush Creek Partners, which is kind of part of that Kauffman Foundation space in Kansas City. And they focus on really like broker related technologies and P&C. So they have a cohort of about 4. And then if you're a little further along in the process as a company, I would say looking to the event organizations that exist. So the 3 of us all organize events in our respective areas, and I'm sure everyone can kind of share what they do. For us specifically, like I said, we run about 8 events a year that people could participate in. But going beyond us 3, Stacey's actually organizing at Insurtech Connect a group of about 10 of us that represent other areas like Denver, Richmond, Virginia, and even going up into Canada. So I think there are other organizations outside of the 3 of us that also organize events. And then if you're further along the curve and you're in that kind of later stage space, there's almost another set of organizations. So there's, in many states, there's job-related organizations. So if you can demonstrate that you can create jobs, oftentimes you can get tax credits or you can get assistance to move into certain states. There's our growth stage accelerator. So for startups that are in the growth stage. And then I think the other thing that is generally available is there's always things for startups in certain cities, and every city has different programs that are available. Like New York has different programs where if people move to New York, you can actually get tax credits, so you don't have to pay your state taxes for up to 10 years for the employees. I know Hartford or Connecticut has similar programs that are like that as well. So every state has different programs, but when you're really in the hiring phase, hiring 10 or more people, a lot of those become very much available to you.
Great. Thanks, David. I think you covered everything. Do you agree, Stacey and Megan?
Yeah, he did.
Quite
He does
thorough.
cover a lot. David's a smart dude. That's why I like him. So, but yeah, I'd say in Connecticut, we're definitely one of those communities that the state is and the government is very interested in helping drive innovation. So we do have tax incentives, but state of Connecticut also has its own venture arm. So they do make investments in companies that are based in Connecticut. So they are a good way of raising seed money. So they'll write checks of $250,000 to $1 million, $1.5 million. So if you're in that stage, we have them as a backing as well. There are incubator programs, like one of the insurers that's in Hartford, NASA Financial Group, has an incubator that they run. We've had accelerator programs in the past, but Insurtech Hartford's biggest thing is the network that we bring and the connections that we bring. We can always connect to any of the programs that are available in the state, as I was mentioning. We also run our own innovation challenge. I know New York runs an innovation challenge as well every year, and so there's a ton of opportunities, I think, particularly up in the Northeast around where we are.
Great, thank you so much. Now I'm going to ask each of you to stay on the line because we've got some questions that have come in, and I'll just ask everyone in the audience, if you do have more questions, to pop them in the Q&A, and we're going to get to those shortly. But I'd like to move now to Justin from Cover Genius. We're going to have a quick chat about your Cover Genius journey in the US. So I've got you on the line there, Justin. Perfect. So I thought, how are you going? Good. I thought I might just start by getting you to just tell us a bit about the Cover Genius journey, and in particular the journey that they've had in the US so far.
Yeah, sure. So Cover Genius is the Insurtech for embedded insurance, and we protect the global customers of the world's largest digital companies at the point of sale or sign up. Companies like Booking Holdings, eBay, Intuit, Descartes, ShipRush, use our global Xcover platform to enable them to embed any line of insurance or warranty product directly to their customers with a single API call. So we're licensed in all 50 US states, as I think a hot topic for this discussion. Also 60 countries worldwide. We distribute insurance policies in over 40 languages, and we pay out claims in over 90 currencies through our Xcover platform. We handle it all, from licensing to claims and to payments. And one of the benefits is that we drive loyalty and growth for our customers, and we do that through a customer-centric approach to our distribution of the policies and our development of those policies. And with that, we have an industry-leading NPS score for our claims of plus 65. So that's a really important part for our partnerships. So the business, a bit of history. It was sort of founded in 2014 with a full stack mobility distribution platform. In 2015, the business was able to secure some great partnerships, in particular the Booking Holdings partnership, which then led the growth of our US licenses and expansion. And then so in 2016, we really sort of put the pedal to the metal on the expansion in the US, and we have offices in New York, Atlanta, San Francisco, and we have various team members scattered across the states. Yeah.
Great. That's pretty incredible that you have licenses in all those regions.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that the choice to look to the US was based on the scale that you could achieve as a business globally. But I'm just interested to find out a little bit more about, that experience so far. Were there maybe even in the early days particular hurdles that you really had to overcome as a business that you might be able to talk about?
Yeah. And I mean, why the USA? It's obviously the biggest market globally. So for us, it was a natural expansion point and one of our first places to expand into. So some of the challenges, obviously, I think the panel's mentioned a few of these, and there's nothing new that I can add to what they've said. We've experienced it. There's things like, the sort of laws and coverages that vary from state to state. That's obviously challenging. The regulation and the legal structures are completely different in the US to most other markets, and especially from Australia. So you have to get your head around those. I think, I think it was David who mentioned that we have people on the ground in the US, and I think that's really important to cover some of those sort of challenges, is to have the right people who know how to sort of navigate those challenges. I think, more specific from a partnership perspective over the last couple of years, I guess it's a couple of years now with COVID, is actually the fact that you need to be on the ground, you need to travel. If you don't have that presence in the US and you're coming from Australia, you need to get over there and have boots on the ground and be present. And COVID has presented some challenges to that recently. Yeah. And we're probably ongoing if you're based in Australia too, with our uncertainty around international travel.
Well, fingers crossed we at some point in the not too distant future will actually be able to get to the US.
Exactly.
that'll be a good start.
Yeah.
Maybe just about that first customer in the US and I don't know if you were involved in it, so it might be tricky for you to talk about, but the first customer that you secured in the US, were there any sort of keys to actually doing that, or how you actually got that across the line? Often that's the trickiest part, that first step.
Yeah. So look, I've been with the business a few years, but the sort of initial part I wasn't here for, but I could talk about a partnership that we did probably 2 years ago with Descartes ShipRush, which is a huge partnership for our shipping vertical. Descartes ShipRush is a shipping platform for e-commerce. They partner with all the e-commerce platforms, marketplaces, different WMSs and order management systems. So, how do we do that? Conferences are a big part of what we do when we sort of went to the industry. So the business is set up where we have different industry verticals because we can do any line of insurance. So we sort of focus on e-commerce, shipping, mobility, property, financial services. So conferences that are specific to those industries, we would go and attend, and we would have partnership people, depending upon where they're located, but we would go and visit those conferences. So with Descartes, we were at those, sort of shipping conferences and met a lot of the people. And effectively, we were at the right time. Our platform, is that customer-centric approach, that NPS of 65. They were looking for a partner that could also take them global. So as they wanted to have their own sort of aspirations to go global, they needed a partner that was able to achieve that without having to replicate the operational sort of burden in each country. So, initially, this is pre-COVID. We got to do those conferences. We met, we discussed, we sort of sit, we worked out what a solution might look like. COVID hit, and obviously with most of that then became online. So, working with the teams, some of our technology teams based here in Australia, our partner services team in the US, and myself in partnerships here in Australia, we just had to manage that through a lot of communication over conferences and Slack channels and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, COVID has definitely popped up a few barriers for many organisations. So it's good that you've been able to get through that. And as I said, hopefully face-to-face opportunities are not too far away. Thanks so much, Justin, for some of those insights. And I'll get you to stay on the line as well now, because we do have some questions that have come through. So I'm going to ask these questions to any of either yourself, Stacey, Megan, or David, whoever feels they're most relevant to answer. And this one actually, well, there's a couple here actually that relate to regulation and licensing. So a question here from Michael: if you had the desire to launch a new traditional product in all 50 states in the US, how long might a filing with each regulator take, and which states might be the easiest or the most difficult to do so? I think a couple of those states were mentioned earlier, but anyone can jump in and answer that one.
Yeah, so I'm happy to take a first stab at this. So I think the first thing is it depends on your approach. And in the US, it's a little bit different than Australia because we have both what's called an admitted market. And admitted market means that everything has to be filed in a traditional way and you have to decide all your pricing up front. And then we have a separate market, which is an excess and surplus lines market. So in the excess and surplus lines market, you essentially can change the way that you submit. So you don't necessarily have to submit everything in the standard rate and filing way. There are certain things from a regulatory requirements that you have to meet, but essentially the primary thing is you have to prove that you kind of got declined from the traditional market. And that's for products that don't necessarily meet specific requirements. Maybe it's embedded, maybe it's a new product that you're inventing. So those can go to market much faster, maybe as short as 6 months. The admitted market, you kind of have to go through a year cycle. And then obviously you're catching regulators in different phases in that cycle. So let's call it a year to 18 months. But there are things you can do to accelerate that process. So if you find in the US what's called a fronting carrier, which is an insurance carrier that will actually lend you their insurance policy paper. So it's on their paper, they already have everything filed, then you can get that down a lot shorter. Maybe it's 6 months because you just have to negotiate with them and they have to have available paper in the products that you want to sell. So I would say, realistically, it's 18 months if you're going from scratch, but you can get it down to as little as 6 months if you can find an existing partner to go to market with.
Great.
Yeah,
thanks.
I was gonna begin by saying that the first thing you got to think about before you decide to sell a product in the U.S. is whether you're going to sell it direct or whether you are going to find an existing carrier. Because if you want to sell it yourself, you got to get licensed as an entity in all the states and where you want to sell it first. And that alone could be time consuming and expensive, never mind then doing the filing. And so assuming that you'd be looking to partner with an existing carrier, I think the things that David said are right on. It's probably about 6 to 12 months, and you have to have a relationship first.
Yeah, great. That makes sense. This is probably a bit of an extension of the question from John. And again, I think it's been referred to a little bit, but often in the past, having a US presence, having a Delaware C Corp, and having a US sales team were all really important, but obviously also expensive for an international startup. How much of that do you think has changed due to COVID, if at all?
I'm sorry, can you just repeat that one more time?
Sure. So often in the past, having a presence in the US, a Delaware C Corp, and then having a US sales team present in the US have all been very important but expensive for for an international startup. Do you think that has changed due to COVID? No.
I could talk from a partnerships perspective. I think it's still very important to have a team based in the USA. You can get a lot done over Zoom and conferencing these days. A lot of people are, a lot more, you can get them out of hours and things like that. So the time zones are a little bit more friendly, but you need people on the ground. I don't think that's changed.
So I'll take that because I really think it's 3 separate questions when you're looking at this and trying to address each one. So the first one is a US presence. So I think when insurance companies look at who they're doing business with, in the check the boxes thing, they're definitely looking for you to have a US entity. And the reason why is, like I was saying before, most US companies are very US centric. And what that means is they feel very comfortable with the US laws. And In the US, there's a lot of lawyers, probably more than almost any other country per capita. So that means that they feel comfortable with operating under our laws. And that means that if there's a potential lawsuit, they want it to happen with an entity that there's something to go after in the US, as kind of tragic as it sounds. So I think having a US entity doesn't mean a Delaware C Corp. I mean, you could create something as simple as an LLC in your favorite state that you want to do business with in your customer, because they're going to want you to follow by the laws of their headquarters state anyways. So that's first, US presence. I think it's essential. Second is Delaware C Corp. So Delaware C Corp, I think if you're raising money, you need to have a Delaware C Corp from US investors. There are investors that will actually invest in you without a Delaware C Corp. One notably, which is actually the most active corporate venture capital group, is MSA&D. You don't need to have a Delaware C Corp for them to invest, and they will invest in you as an Australian company. So that's one thing of note. But I would say 70 to 80% of the venture capitalists you're going to talk to want you to have a Delaware C Corp for the same rules that I mentioned above from the legal standpoint. And actually handling legal disputes in Delaware is very efficient because they understand business there. The last piece is having a US sales team, and how has that changed with COVID? So I think having a US sales team is still important because there's certain things from US culture and values perspective that the sales team will get and be able to overcome some hiccups early on. But I think COVID has made it so having a US sales team is maybe not as important. So let's just say you had a sales team in Toronto, or you had a sales team in London, or let's just say you had a sales team in the Caribbean islands. They could still understand a lot of the things that people are going through. And I think that they could relate and they could overcome a lot of the challenges. So it's not essential. And COVID has definitely made it less essential.
Great. That's really helpful. We've got probably time for one or two more questions. So based on each of your experiences, what is the most efficient way for Australian companies to engage with insurers who are open to partner in the early stage development of a solution? So a true partnership with them being a potential beta customer. So if anyone has any tips on the most efficient way that Australian company can engage with that insurer at the early stage.
I'll give 3 tips. So first tip is don't ask insurers for their data. That's the thing that they want to share the least. So if you can design a POC that has no data requirements, you're golden. The second thing is, and this is painful, but don't ask insurers in the pilot for money. If you can say, hey, we have a no cost option that's going to take you a few weeks or a few months, then you don't have to go through all the complicated contracting. And then the last tip, and I think this often goes ignored, is you really want to be able to provide a hands-on experience. And the reason why is many insurance carriers are understaffed in the innovation teams and they're just running all the time. So if you can say, hey, I don't just have a software that I'm going to hand off to you to figure out, but I have a project management team, I have an onboarding process, and here's the 90-day roadmap on what we're going to do for you to implement it, that's going to create a lot of confidence. So then they feel like you're no different than Microsoft or Ernst & Young or any other vendor that they would work with, and they feel comfortable. So I think if you can do those 3 things, you're going to have a very successful pilot in the US.
Like David could have led so much of this, and it's very fun listening to you, David. The only small piece I'd add on is I learned the hard way that each insurance company, sometimes they call pilots and POCs different words. And sometimes they may say, we do not do a pilot program, but they do something. So what it does not hurt to figure out with clear, transparent communication on what they do offer and where you can partner to do your beta testing with them.
And I'll add another angle to this one, just because I do have the day job hat too that I can speak from. That's the insurer side of the house, and there's no such thing as free. And because even remember back to the comment that I made earlier about insurers have resources, but not unlimited resources. So they have to prioritize their time and stuff. That partly supports what David was saying in terms of people are busy. If you can make it easy, like 1, 2, 3, you walk them through the steps and make and help them get through it and help them understand how it's going to work. That's great. Trying to do some, let's whiteboard it out, figure out what your problems and pain points are. You're not going to win that. But the thing about free is there is no such thing as free. The insurers have to invest their own time and their own resources at the very least. And I've seen more disappointments happen from people thinking things are free, because what happens is sometimes vendors get their hooks into insurance executives and tell them, don't worry, we'll take it and it'll be free. You don't have to pay us anything. But then eventually there comes a time where you have to pay. And so all of a sudden now the executive says, but I'm too busy to make the business case to move forward with this. So you have two options: either keep trying to serve them for free, hoping one of these days they'll scale up and you'll start making money for it, or you shut it down, you walk away realizing how much of your time and your resources you wasted. So there is no such thing as free. That's just my other side of the fence lens looking at it. So for companies that I advise, I usually tell them, you got to get paid, otherwise it's not going to end well. It's been just from experiences I've had and things I've seen.
Yeah, I agree. There's a point David made too about showing them the solution, or talking them through the solution, showing the solution that you have, because that will give them internally, especially with their compliance teams and things like that, the ability for them to understand and to be able to communicate that internally. If you rely on them to communicate your proposal without showing them and giving them the tools to do it internally, it's probably going to fail.
Yeah, I feel like we need to make a cheat sheet of all these tips you're all providing us so generously. I am going to ask this one last question, even though I know we're a couple of minutes over time because we haven't covered it. And if anyone has any insight onto the state of the broker market or the intermediary market in the US, is GWP static, reducing, or increasing with brokers? And if there's any broker management platforms that have had a lot of success from an Insurtech perspective, if anyone has insights into that, jump in.
That's definitely a lot of questions. So I was thinking a couple times during today's session about, what about the broker side, right? Because we talk a lot about Insurtech, we talk about a lot about the insurers, but insurance is distributed through brokers. The customer relationships are managed through the brokers. It's probably the most value-added part of the equation. And there's been lots of noise over the years about disintermediation and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, the broker's not really going anywhere. I think as products become commoditized, they become more available digitally and electronically, but there's still a need for trust, relationships, and advice, and that's where the broker market is. There are accelerator programs and groups that are just focused on broker tech. Broker tech has been around for almost as long as Insurtech. In fact, it might have been the original Insurtech, and yet there is still a growth in that market and in that space as well. And certainly there's a lot of there's basically, I think, 3 types of brokers. One is the big ones, like your Aons and your Marshes and your Willis Tower Watsons of the world, who are multi-billion-dollar companies, and they sell every product under the sun somewhere in the world. But then you've got the flip side. You've got the small and independent ones that are, the local person on the corner. I think there's a lot of consolidation going on in those markets because there are more people leaving the industry than entering it, and that is also creating opportunity for technology. And then the third category that I would put brokers under are the captive brokers. So there are, like in the U.S., for example, State Farm has its own agency force, and so that's another area where but I guess you can almost look at those as insurers, because the insurers would be making tech decisions. But there are definitely broker tech platforms, and I'll just stop to see if anybody else wants to jump for the sake of time, but there's definitely answers to that question too. I don't know, Megan or Dave, if you want to jump in.
Sure. Yeah, happy to add. So I think I'll cover the market itself and then the broker tech. So in terms of the market, two trends to be aware of that are happening in the US market. First is Stacey mentioned kind of the dichotomy. There's the large supersized brokers, and then there's everything down to like a one-person agent that's independent. But what's happening in the US is that that market is aging. So the average age of the broker now is somewhere between like 59 and 61 or so. So because of that, there's a lot of consolidation where agencies are getting bought. So if you look at the big ones that Stacey mentioned, Aon, Willis, Gallagher, Marsh, Lockton, they're all buying smaller brokerages. So 5 years from now, the footprint is going to be less smaller brokerages that make things up, and it's going to be larger ones that are more federated. Second trend to be aware of is a lot of the larger carriers are making plays to be able to sell direct, which is creating some version of channel conflict. And just to give you a couple of examples, so in Stacey's neck of the woods, Travelers started Traverse, which is a personal artifacts insurance. In New York, Chubb started Blink, which is a business lines direct distribution product. And also in New York, Guardian started direct selling life, and Pacific Life started Next. So a lot of the carriers are experimenting with their own digital direct distribution, which is more akin to the Australian market. So I think that universe that you're really familiar with is coming to the US. And if you can help that transformation, that's a very valuable thing to the carriers. Last thing in terms of technology. So like Stacey said, some of the oldest technology that exists, and it's typically called in the US agency management systems. So they've been consolidating as well, but the top agency management systems still continue to have a lot of influence over the market. And I think if you can partner with them or integrate, that's definitely powerful. But there are things that are improving. So there's a lot of friction in the process in the US between agents and brokers in the submission part of things. And there's a lot of great companies that are coming about like Relay and Broker Buddha that are trying to solve that submission problem.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. We definitely have run out of time, but we've covered so much ground today, and just incredibly appreciative of all your time. I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. Don't hesitate to reach out if you've got follow-up questions, because we didn't get through them all today. A huge thank you to Austrade, Cover Genius, Insurtech Hartford, Insurtech New York, and to the GIA for sharing your time and knowledge with us this morning. As I mentioned, our next session in this series is focused on the UK market, but we have so many nuggets of information there. I think Joy and I will try and put them into some sort of document to share them with you all and summarize some of those key things that we've covered today. So thanks everyone, and we hope to see you next time.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.